I never thought a single envelope could shatter everything I believed about my life. One moment I was just a husband, quietly living in the shadow of my wife's brilliance, and the next, I was thrust into a world I wasn't prepared for, holding the keys to her entire empire. My heart pounded, every nerve alert, as the lawyer cleared his throat and held up the document that would redefine my existence. "Mr. Carter," the lawyer began, his voice deliberate, measured. "Your wife has left you the entirety of her estate, including her business interests and personal holdings." I blinked, repeated it in my head, tasting the weight of the words. Entirety of her estate. Her empire. My stomach twisted. The room seemed to tilt, the walls closing in, and yet, beneath the panic, a spark ignited. This was no ordinary inheritance. It was a test I hadn't expected, a challenge that would expose everything I was made of. Then came the voice that sliced through the tension, sharp as a blade. "Running Mom's life's work? You don't deserve this." My stepson's fury was palpable, his eyes flaring with anger and disbelief. He looked at me not as a husband or a stepfather, but as an intruder who had stolen something he thought was rightfully his. I forced calm I didn't feel. "We'll see what the law says, but I didn't expect you to be happy about it." His glare could have melted steel. I felt the resentment radiating off him in waves. I wanted to retreat, to vanish and let him claim the empire. But some part of me, something my wife must have recognized in me, held me in place. I owed her more than retreat. I owed myself the chance to rise. The room blurred. Lawyers scribbled, relatives whispered, but I felt only the cold weight of responsibility pressing down. This empire wasn't just money or property, it was her life's work, her legacy, and now, it was mine. I tried to steady my thoughts. "You're capable. You have to be capable." My background was modest. My career had never been glamorous. I had built quietly, without fanfare. And now, I was expected to step into a world I had only glimpsed. The pressure was suffocating, but deep down, a thrill began to pulse. This was terrifying, yes, but it was also exhilarating. "You have no idea what you're up against," my stepson spat. "I'll make sure everyone knows the truth about you. About what you really are." The word truth hit me. What was the truth? That I had quietly achieved more than anyone suspected? That I had always been underestimated? I wanted to tell him, "I am more than you think." But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I nodded. "Then let the law decide." The lawyer cleared his throat, professional and unyielding. "Mr. Carter, there will be proceedings if your stepson contests the will. Careful consideration is advised." I watched him, my stepson's frustration mounting. Ambition was in his blood, but so was entitlement. He didn't understand yet that value isn't inherited, it's earned. I felt an unexpected kinship with him. Beneath his anger, I recognized the same fire I'd carried all my life. Impatience, drive, hunger for recognition. But this inheritance, this empire, was mine now. I had to wield it wisely. I had to prove I could handle what lay ahead, not to silence him, but to honor her. I stepped into the cold hallway after the reading. Winter air bit at my face as I closed my eyes, trying to quiet the storm in my head. I pictured the empire as a living, intricate machine. Now, it was my responsibility to make it run, or watch it crumble. There would be battles, legal, familial, and internal. But a clarity pulsed in me. I did not come this far to be defeated by words or expectation. And then I heard it again, faint but piercing. "You're nothing. You don't deserve this." I could scream, argue, fight, but the real fight hadn't begun. It would come in courtrooms, boardrooms, whispered conversations. And when it did, I would not flinch. I tightened my coat. The city stretched before me, indifferent to my future struggles. Yet, somewhere in that expanse, I felt anticipation, a deep knowing that my life had led me to this exact moment. I didn't know how it would end, if my stepson's fury could be tamed, or if his lawyer would live up to the rumors. I only knew I was here, and I would not back down. This inheritance was more than property, it was a proving ground. I inhaled sharply, the cold air filling my lungs, and stepped forward. Each footfall echoed destiny, carrying me into the unknown. Behind me, the door clicked shut, separating my old life from this new, perilous path. And as I faced the horizon of lawsuits, board meetings, and family confrontations, I felt the first pulse of something dangerous, something exhilarating, the power to finally define myself. No one, not my stepson, not the lawyers, not anyone in that room, knew who I really was yet. And they were about to find out. I never imagined that a single man in a tailored suit could make me feel both intimidated and strangely alive at the same time. When my stepson hired the city's top lawyer, I knew the fight for my wife's empire had officially begun, and that the world I was stepping into was far harsher than I had ever anticipated. From the moment he walked into the room, polished and precise, I could sense the kind of mind that left no room for mistakes, no room for mercy. He introduced himself formally, his voice crisp and calculated, each word designed to assert dominance. "Mr. Carter, I am Alexander Rowe. I'll be representing your stepson in this matter." The way he looked at me, like I was an obstacle to be removed, made my skin crawl, but it also awakened something I hadn't felt in years, a thrill of challenge. I leaned back in my chair, letting the air between us thicken with tension. I had no intention of showing fear, even if every fiber of my body screamed otherwise. "I see," I said, calm, measured. "I look forward to proving what the law dictates, and maybe even surprising you in the process." The corners of his mouth twitched, a flicker of acknowledgement, but nothing more. He was the kind of man who never underestimated himself or anyone, and I could feel the subtle trap in every polite syllable. As the formalities unfolded, I reflected on my own past. People always assumed my life had been ordinary, quiet, unremarkable, but they didn't know. They had never seen the late nights I spent building small empires of my own, the calculated risks I took without anyone noticing, the silent victories I had quietly accumulated over the years. They didn't know that beneath the unassuming exterior, I had a mind for strategy, a mind that could navigate even the most ruthless of opponents. My stepson was pacing nearby, unable to contain his frustration. His anger radiated outward, a storm barely held at bay, and yet his lawyer's presence seemed to ground him, keep him from acting recklessly. I could see the mix of pride and fear in his eyes, and I understood it all too well. Ambition carries its own burden. Entitlement disguises it. I had been there once, and I had survived it. Rose spoke again, his tone almost clinical. "You will need to provide documentation of your capability, Mr. Carter. Your background, your experience, everything that proves you are fit to manage the estate." There it was, the assumption, thinly veiled as procedure, that I was unworthy, unprepared, a man in over his head. I smiled inwardly. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. I excused myself briefly, stepping into the corridor to collect my thoughts. The echo of my steps on the marble floor felt like a countdown to a confrontation I had already been anticipating. I needed to plan, to strategize. If they thought they could intimidate me with prestige and paperwork, they were in for a surprise. I had survived worse storms, and I intended to navigate this one with precision. Returning to the room, I kept my composure, watching every small movement, every subtle cue. I noticed the way Rose's eyes darted for leverage, the way my stepson's jaw tightened at the mention of legal procedures, the way the air seemed to hum with expectation. All of them were waiting for me to falter, waiting for me to show weakness. But I wouldn't. I couldn't. We discussed schedules, hearings, and evidence. At each turn, I felt the invisible pressure mounting, the weight of expectation pressing down. Yet, amidst the tension, a quiet resolve began to solidify in me. I would not only defend this inheritance, I would master it. Every challenge, every accusation, every scrutiny would be an opportunity to demonstrate my hidden strengths, the ones no one had seen coming. Rose's piercing gaze met mine one last time before he left. "This is only the beginning, Mr. Carter." The words were casual, almost dismissive, but the undercurrent was clear. He intended to break me, to strip away confidence, to find flaws. I allowed a slight nod, letting the facade of acquiescence mask the storm brewing beneath. I stepped outside into the late afternoon sun, feeling the sharp chill against my face. It was a bitter reminder that battles, no matter how meticulously planned, always came with discomfort, with risk. But I welcomed it, because for the first time in a long time, I felt fully alive, fully alert. My mind began spinning through contingencies, strategies, potential allies, and hidden advantages. The quiet victories of my past, the lessons learned in unseen corners of my life, all pointed me toward one undeniable truth: I was ready. That night, alone in my apartment, I allowed myself a rare moment of reflection. I thought of my wife, her brilliance, her foresight in trusting me with her legacy. I thought of my stepson, his raw anger, his assumptions about who I was. And I thought of Ro, the man who believed he could anticipate every move, every weakness. None of them knew me. None of them had seen the depth of my experience, the quiet power I had cultivated over the years. And soon they would. I sat back, letting the city lights flicker through my window, and I felt a strange combination of anticipation and calm. The fight ahead would be intense, unrelenting, and perhaps the most defining challenge of my life. But it was exactly the kind of battle that I had been preparing for, often unknowingly, my entire life. And somewhere deep inside, I allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to form. Because when the lawyer, when my stepson, when anyone thought they had me figured out, they would realize the truth: I was more than capable. I was ready. And the real game was only just beginning. I had walked into many rooms in my life, but none like the courtroom that morning. The air was thick with tension, the kind that makes your skin prickle and your pulse accelerate without mercy. Every chair, every polished surface, every hushed whisper seemed to magnify the stakes. Today, I wasn't just a husband, a stepfather, or a quiet man from a modest background. I was the defendant in a battle that would determine not just the future of an empire, but my identity in the eyes of everyone who mattered. The opposing lawyer, Alexander Rowe, was already at the table, exuding a calm confidence that bordered on arrogance. I could feel the courtroom's anticipation like a living thing, waiting for me to falter. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that appearances were everything here, but substance was everything beneath that. I had prepared for this moment in my mind countless times, running through strategies, anticipating objections, predicting every possible move. Still, nothing could replicate the intensity of facing it live. "Mr. Carter," Rowe began, voice steady, measured, "you claim to have the experience and capability to manage this estate. Can you demonstrate that to this court?" I straightened in my seat, letting the calm exterior mask the storm of thoughts swirling inside me. "I believe actions speak louder than words, sir. But I am prepared to provide any documentation, testimony, or evidence required to prove my competence." Rowe's eyes narrowed slightly, an almost imperceptible twitch. I allowed a small, confident smile to cross my face, just enough to let him know I was not intimidated. But the real work was in the subtleties: how I carried myself, how I projected calm authority, how I let the courtroom sense that while they were trying to size me up, I had already anticipated every angle. My stepson sat nearby, fuming quietly, his hands clenching and unclenching in tension. He had believed this day would crush me, that his lawyer would tear me apart and leave me humiliated. He didn't understand yet that appearances can be deceptive, that there's always more beneath the surface. The judge called the session to order, and the questioning began. Rowe pressed me on my background, my prior experiences, my familiarity with corporate management. Every question was a trap, a test, a subtle attempt to expose weakness. I answered with precision, weaving my past successes into a narrative of quiet competence without arrogance. I didn't need to shout. I only needed to let my words and demeanor carry the authority that the courtroom expected. As the minutes ticked by, I felt a strange rhythm settle over me. Every objection, every pointed question, every skeptical glance became fuel. I reminded myself that this was more than just about money or property. It was about proving to myself, and eventually to my stepson, that I belonged here. That I had the intellect, the judgment, and the determination to not only defend this empire but to thrive in it. A subtle smirk crossed Rowe's face when he asked about my educational background. "Mr. Carter, your resume is unconventional. How can we trust your ability to handle a business of this scale? I met his gaze steadily. Unconventional paths often lead to unconventional success. I have built, managed, and turned around complex ventures before, with results that speak for themselves. My ability to adapt and strategize is exactly why I am qualified to manage this estate. There was a slight murmur in the room. I could sense the weight of expectation shifting ever so slightly, the first cracks appearing in the narrative that they had crafted, that I was unworthy, unprepared, an imposter. I let that energy linger, letting the courtroom feel the quiet confidence that I had cultivated over years of hidden victories. During a brief recess, I found myself alone in the hallway, pacing as the echoes of my footsteps mingled with the distant hum of conversation from the courtroom. I thought about my stepson, how his anger was so intertwined with his assumptions. He had never considered that someone like me could possess both patience and cunning, that my quiet life had been anything but uneventful. He had no idea of the strategy, the foresight, and the hidden accomplishments that I had quietly amassed. Returning to the room, the tension felt almost tangible. Rowe continued his questioning, but I could sense the subtle shift now. Every pointed comment, every challenge, every skeptical glance was now met with an equal and measured response. I was no longer reacting, I was controlling the rhythm. The courtroom began to see that while my demeanor was calm, my mind was razor-sharp, ready to counter any attempt to undermine me. I caught a glimpse of my stepson during a lull in the questioning. His jaw was tight, his anger mixed with confusion. He had believed that the court would validate his assumptions, that the world would see me as an interloper. But as he watched me answer each question with clarity and precision, I could see the doubt creeping in. He was beginning to realize that I was more than he had imagined. The judge called a brief adjournment, allowing everyone to step outside. I remained composed, though inside, the thrill of the challenge coursed through me. Every doubt, every insult, every expectation of failure had been transformed into fuel. I had felt the fire of confrontation, and instead of burning me, it had illuminated my strengths. Walking out into the crisp air, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The battle was far from over. There would be more hearings, more challenges, more attempts to undermine me. But this first encounter had set the tone. I was not only here to defend my position, I was here to assert it. And anyone who doubted me would soon learn that quiet competence often masks a formidable power. The city stretched out around me, indifferent to the drama unfolding in the courtroom. But I felt it, every whisper of wind, every shadowed alleyway, every distant sound carried the promise of opportunity. The stepson, the lawyer, the empire itself, they were all part of a game I was finally ready to play. And I was ready to win. I knew this day would come. The first true confrontation with my stepson. After weeks of tense glances, whispered threats, and courtroom maneuvers, it was finally happening outside the legal formalities, face to face. The office was stark, sterile, every surface polished to perfection, reflecting the cold light that seemed almost designed to make me feel out of place. And yet, as I stepped in, I felt a surge of purpose, a quiet fire that had been building since the reading of the will. He was waiting, arms crossed, a posture that screamed defiance. "You think you can just walk into my mother's world and take it over?" His voice was sharp, brittle, loaded with anger and disbelief. I could feel the tension radiating off him, every muscle coiled, ready for confrontation. But I refused to mirror his fury. Calm was my weapon now, strategy my shield. "I don't think," I said, measured, steady. "I know what I've been entrusted with. This isn't about taking over. It's about honoring her legacy and proving that it's in capable hands." His eyes narrowed. "Capable? You've never run anything on this scale. You're out of your depth." I leaned forward slightly, letting my presence fill the room without aggression. "Perhaps you underestimate me. But every challenge, every complex problem I've faced has prepared me for this moment. You may see a quiet man. I see someone ready to act, to make decisions, and to manage this empire effectively." The words seemed to hit him differently than I expected. His anger was still there, but beneath it I sensed confusion, a crack in his certainty. He had assumed he knew me, assumed that my quiet life had been insignificant. He had no idea the depth of planning, the careful calculations, the silent victories that had brought me here. Actions speak louder than words, I continued. And that's what you'll see. Not arrogance, not entitlement, but results. That's what matters. He took a step closer, his anger boiling over but tempered by hesitation. You don't understand the stakes here. Everything she built, everything she cared about, it was meant for me, not you. I met his gaze steadily, unflinching. She trusted me with it because she believed in my judgment, my integrity, my capability. And if you want to protect her legacy, you'll understand that the goal isn't to fight, but to ensure it continues to thrive. That requires perspective, discipline, and yes, patience. There was a silence, heavy and charged, as he processed my words. I could see the internal battle within him, the mix of resentment, fear, and maybe, just maybe, a grudging respect. The confrontation was not just about property. It was about recognition, about asserting that capability is not always obvious, that quiet strength can be underestimated at one's peril. You think this will be easy? He asked finally, his voice quieter now, tinged with uncertainty. Do you really think it will just work out? I allowed a small, confident smile. Nothing worth doing is ever easy. But I didn't inherit this empire to be passive. I inherited it to act, to manage, and to protect what was entrusted to me. That's not arrogance, it's responsibility. He looked away for a moment, and I could see the tension in his jaw, the tightness in his shoulders. Even in anger, there was hesitation. And that hesitation told me something crucial. He was beginning to understand that I was not the obstacle he had imagined. I was, perhaps, the unexpected challenge he hadn't prepared for. The confrontation ended with no resolution, but it left a charged atmosphere, a sense of mutual awareness. Neither of us had backed down, yet neither of us had fully won. And that was exactly where I wanted it. Because from here, every decision, every action, every calculated move would shape the path ahead. As I walked out of the office, I felt a strange combination of adrenaline and calm. The first confrontation had set the tone, direct, unflinching, and strategic. I had met his anger with composure, his assumptions with clarity, and his challenge with quiet authority. And in doing so, I had established an unspoken truth. I was not to be underestimated. The city outside was bright and indifferent, but inside me, the fire of purpose burned steadily. This confrontation was only the beginning. Battles would come, legal, emotional, and strategic. But I had taken the first step, and the first truth had been established. No one, not even my stepson, would dictate my worth. I was ready to fight, to strategize, and to claim what had been entrusted to me, not for ego, but for the legacy that mattered most. I had always known that one day, the truth would have to come out. The quiet, calculated moves, the silent victories, the hidden depth of my life, all of it was a secret to those around me. But today, that secret was about to be weaponized, revealed, and finally understood by the people who thought they knew me, especially my stepson. The tension in the boardroom was suffocating. My stepson sat across from me, his posture rigid, his eyes flicking nervously toward his lawyer. He believed he had every advantage, that I was just a man with no experience, no connections, no hidden acumen. He didn't know the layers beneath my calm exterior, the life I had built quietly, carefully, and strategically. The first documents were exchanged. Financial records, contracts, historical business correspondence, all meant to paint me as inexperienced, unworthy, and unprepared. Roe's confidence was palpable, almost theatrical, as if he had rehearsed this reveal to perfection. But I had anticipated it. Every move he made was expected, every strategy countered in my mind long before it crossed the room. I opened my folder slowly, deliberately, letting him see the patience in my actions. You'll find, I said quietly measured, that there's more to my background than you've assumed. More than you've ever been willing to look for. Roe leaned forward, intrigued, skeptical, and I smiled inwardly. This was exactly the reaction I had hoped for. The revelation would be subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but its impact would ripple through the room like a quiet explosion. I began to share details: previous ventures I had managed successfully, strategic partnerships I had orchestrated behind the scenes, risks I had navigated with precision and discretion. Each revelation was small, methodical, but collectively, they built a picture that no one could ignore. I wasn't just capable, I was formidable. My stepson's jaw tightened, his fury mixing with confusion. He had never considered that the man he resented, the man he believed to be a parasite, could possess this depth of experience and insight. Every claim, every accusation he had made now collided with the reality of my proven track record. You did all of this quietly?" he asked, voice trembling slightly, caught between disbelief and begrudging respect. I met his gaze steadily, calm, unshaken. "Just quietly, because that's how I've always operated. I don't need recognition to be effective. I let results speak for themselves. And the results speak clearly here." The room fell into a charged silence. Even Rowe, the seasoned, unflappable lawyer, paused, absorbing the magnitude of what had been revealed. The subtle shift in energy was undeniable. What had been assumed was weak, unworthy, and incapable was, in fact, competent, strategic, and deliberate. I had turned the very narrative they had built against them, not with arrogance, but with fact, precision, and timing. My stepson's expression shifted, the anger in his eyes flickering with doubt. He had expected me to falter, to be exposed, to crumble under the weight of scrutiny. But instead I had revealed the truth, the real me. And that truth was more than he had bargained for. I leaned back slightly, letting the room absorb the full weight of my disclosure. "It's not about underestimating anyone," I said quietly, purposefully. "It's about understanding that what looks quiet or simple often conceals the effort, the strategy, and the experience behind it. If you're committed to protecting Mom's legacy, you'll recognize that it's not about ego, it's about capability." The subtle impact of that statement lingered. I had shifted the power dynamic, not through confrontation, but through revelation. I had forced everyone to reconsider what they thought they knew about me, and in doing so, I had created a new sense of respect, even if grudging, in my stepson. Rowe finally spoke, his voice measured, carefully neutral. "It seems we underestimated you, Mr. Carter." There it was, acknowledgement from a man who rarely conceded. I allowed myself a small nod, letting the truth of the moment settle. The secret was no longer hidden. My stepson's assumptions had been challenged, my reputation quietly but firmly established, and the subtle game of power had shifted in my favor. But I knew this was only the beginning. The revelation had set the stage, but battles, legal and personal, still loomed. And now, everyone in the room had to contend with a new reality. I was far more capable than anyone had imagined. As I left the boardroom that evening, the cool night air against my face was invigorating. The first wave had passed. I had revealed the secret, reshaped expectations, and begun to assert my authority not just through position, but through truth and skill. My stepson would think twice before underestimating me again, and Rowe would have to recalibrate his approach. I allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The path ahead was still fraught with challenges, but the secret had been revealed. And with it, a new power settled into my chest, the power of truth, preparation, and unshakable confidence. I had turned the tide, and the game was only beginning. The moment I had been preparing for had finally arrived. The turning point. The legal maneuvers, the subtle confrontations, the careful revelations, it all built to this day. I could feel it the moment I stepped into the glass-walled conference room, the city skyline behind me a reminder of the stakes at hand. This wasn't just a fight for inheritance anymore. It was a test of strategy, resilience, and identity. My stepson was there, tense, his posture rigid as he tried to project confidence. Across from him, Rowe's calm precision masked the undercurrent of strategy and calculation that had defined every meeting, every deposition, every exchange so far. And there I stood, quiet, deliberate, fully aware that the next moves would define not just the outcome of the estate, but the perception of me in everyone's eyes. The discussion began immediately, questions flying from both sides, probing for weaknesses, testing resolve. I had anticipated every possible angle, every line of attack, and yet the intensity of real-time confrontation was different. It demanded clarity, decisiveness, and the kind of calm authority that comes only from deep preparation and conviction. "Mr. Carter," Rose started, his tone polite but edged with challenge, "we need assurances that the management of this estate will maintain the standards your stepson believes are essential. Can you provide that?" I looked around the room, making eye contact with the few observers present, letting the gravity of the moment settle. "Assurances are meaningless if they are empty," I said, measured, calm. "I have the experience, the insight, and the strategy to ensure that every aspect of this estate is managed with precision. Actions, not promises, will demonstrate my capability." A murmur ran through the room. I could feel the shift. The stepson's face betrayed frustration as the quiet power of my words settled. He had expected to dominate the conversation, to corner me with rhetoric and assumption, but I was not cornered. I was in command. The discussion turned to contingencies, potential challenges, and difficult decisions that would test the resilience of whoever managed the empire. Each scenario was a potential trap, a subtle way to see if I could think under pressure. But I met every hypothetical with clear, methodical reasoning. I drew on years of hidden experience, silent victories that no one had witnessed, yet had prepared me perfectly for this moment. Then came the pivotal question, the one that felt like the fulcrum on which the entire battle rested. "Mr. Carter," Rose said, leaning slightly forward, "what if your stepson continues to oppose your leadership? How will you respond?" I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. Calmness was my ally now, and every word mattered. Opposition will be met with transparency, strategy, and unwavering focus on what's best for the legacy. Personal animosity will not cloud judgment. I have faced opposition before, and each challenge has strengthened my resolve. This is no different. I will act decisively, ethically, and effectively. The room was quiet. My stepson's eyes flicked toward me, a flash of realization, or maybe hesitation, crossing his face. He was beginning to understand that the quiet man he had dismissed, the man he had assumed would falter under pressure, had a depth and resilience that could not be underestimated. The turning point crystallized in that moment. Perception and reality collided. The stepson had assumed power through entitlement, lawyers, and assumptions. I had power through preparation, experience, and unshakable composure. And in that balance, the momentum had shifted. As the meeting adjourned, I allowed myself a private moment of reflection. The tension had not dissipated, but a subtle confidence had taken root. I had met the challenge, faced the opposition, and emerged with the first tangible shift in control. The stepson would no longer see me as a passive figure, the lawyers would no longer underestimate me. And most importantly, I had proven to myself that I could rise to the demands placed before me. Walking through the corridors, I felt the city around me pulse with possibility. The turning point was more than a single moment. It was a shift in narrative, a quiet assertion of competence that no one could erase. I had turned the tide, but I knew the battles ahead would test me further. Legal skirmishes, emotional confrontations, and strategic moves still loomed. But now, I was no longer reacting. I was setting the pace, defining the terms, and preparing to claim the authority that had been entrusted to me. The turning point was not just about the empire. It was about identity, about confidence, about proving that resilience, strategy, and quiet strength were more powerful than assumptions and inherited entitlement. And as I left the conference room, the winter air against my face felt sharper, clearer, as if the city itself acknowledged the shift. I was no longer merely surviving the storm, I was steering it. And from this moment, everything would be different. The day had finally arrived, the moment when everything would be tested. The courtroom was charged with tension so thick it felt like it could be sliced with a knife. I had rehearsed every scenario, anticipated every challenge, and prepared for every accusation. Yet standing there, I could feel the magnitude of the moment pressing down on me. This was no longer theory, strategy, or rehearsal. This was reality, raw and unrelenting. My stepson sat across from me, his posture rigid, jaw tight, eyes blazing with defiance. He believed he had the upper hand, that his lawyer, Roe, and the weight of his entitlement would crush me. But I had prepared for this. I had revealed the truth of my experience, the hidden layers of my capability, and now it was time to prove them in action. The proceedings began immediately. Roe questioned me, his tone polished, precise, designed to expose any hint of weakness. Every question was a challenge, a test of not just knowledge, but composure. I answered with calm authority, drawing on every lesson I had learned, every calculated move I had mastered. I did not rush. I did not falter. I let my confidence speak through measured words, steady tone, and unwavering eye contact. Then came the pivotal moment. Roe leaned forward, voice deliberate, almost threatening in its calmness. "Mr. Carter, are you aware of the potential conflicts of interest within the estate management? Can you guarantee decisions that are unbiased and strategic?" I held his gaze, letting a quiet certainty settle over the room. "I am fully aware. I have reviewed every aspect, analyzed every risk, and created contingency plans for every potential challenge. Decisions will be made strategically, with integrity, and always with the legacy as the primary objective. Bias does not guide me, results do." The judge's eyes narrowed slightly, the subtle tension signaling that my response was making an impression. My stepson's hands tightened into fists, a visible indication that the tide was shifting. He had assumed I would crumble under pressure, but the calm, unwavering clarity of my answers was dismantling the narrative he had built. A hush fell over the courtroom as I began to outline my plan, restructuring strategies, operational improvements, risk management, and leadership initiatives. Each point was deliberate, grounded in experience, and delivered with authority. I wasn't just defending my position, I was asserting it. "You see," I said, voice steady, confident, "this empire is more than assets. It is a living entity, requiring careful guidance, strategic vision, and decisive action. My approach ensures continuity, growth, and protection of everything that has been entrusted to me." The subtle but undeniable shift in energy was palpable. Even Roe, meticulous and composed, seemed momentarily caught off guard by the depth and precision of my plan. My stepson's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of realization that I was no ordinary opponent. I was a force to be reckoned with, someone whose quiet life had honed skills perfectly suited for this moment. Then came the most intense confrontation, the face-to-face moment with my stepson. He stood abruptly, the air between us crackling. "You think you can just step in and control everything? You think you're the man she trusted?" I rose, matching his intensity without aggression. "I am the man she trusted. And now, it's not about belief or perception, it's about results. I will manage this empire with the discipline, strategy, and integrity it deserves. Your anger and assumptions do not define my capability." The courtroom held its breath. He looked at me, searching for weakness, any hint that he could exploit. But there was none. Only calm, focus, and an unshakable command of the situation. "Actions will speak louder than words," I continued. "And the actions from here forward will prove my worth, not to you, not to anyone, but to the legacy we all share." A tense silence followed. The weight of the confrontation had shifted decisively. My stepson's fury now mixed with confusion and a dawning respect. Roe's composed mask revealed a flicker of acknowledgement. The truth was undeniable. I was prepared, capable, and unwavering. The judge finally called for a recess, the courtroom buzzing with the energy of what had just transpired. I remained calm, absorbing the moment. The climax confrontation had achieved its purpose. It had tested my limits, asserted my authority, and transformed perception. The battle for recognition, for legitimacy, for control had reached a pivotal peak. As I stepped into the hallway, I felt the surge of adrenaline begin to fade, replaced by a focused clarity. The empire, the legacy, the stepson, the lawyers, all had been confronted and accounted for. I had met the storm head-on and emerged not just unscathed, but strengthened. This was the climax, the moment where strategy, courage, and skill converged. And as I walked through the courthouse doors, the city air against my face felt like a promise. The final resolution was within reach, and the power to define myself and this empire was now firmly in my hands. The courtroom had quieted, the storm of confrontation and strategy finally settling into a tense calm. After weeks of legal maneuvers, heated exchanges, and revelations that had shifted every assumption, the final resolution was at hand. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down. Not just the weight of the estate, but the weight of responsibility, expectation, and legacy. My stepson sat across from me, his posture no longer rigid, but contemplative. There was still tension in his eyes, a spark of lingering resentment, but also a flicker of recognition. He finally saw me as more than he had assumed. The lawyer, Rowe, maintained his professional composure, but I could sense the quiet recalibration, the acknowledgement that the man they had underestimated had risen to the challenge with skill, strategy, and integrity. The judge spoke, his voice measured but final. After careful consideration of the evidence, testimony, and presentations, the court recognizes Mr. Carter as the rightful executor and manager of the estate. It is clear that he possesses the requisite experience, judgment, and capability to fulfill this responsibility. A wave of relief and quiet triumph washed over me. The room seemed to exhale, the tension dissolving like mist. But there was no celebration here, no fanfare, only the sober recognition of what had been accomplished. I had not only secured the estate, but I had established authority, credibility, and a sense of control that extended beyond the courtroom. I glanced at my stepson. His expression was complex, a mixture of lingering anger, reluctant respect, and perhaps even a hint of admiration. He had challenged me, tested me, but in the end he had been forced to see the truth. I was not an intruder, not a passive bystander, but a capable, decisive force entrusted with his mother's legacy. And that acknowledgement, silent though it was, meant more than any legal victory. Rowe approached, extending a firm hand. "Well handled, Mr. Carter," he said, voice steady but with an unmistakable undertone of respect. I shook his hand, allowing the acknowledgement of competence to settle in. Every step, every strategy, every revelation had led to this moment, and now it was solidified in outcome and perception. Walking out of the courthouse, the winter air was sharp, bracing, and exhilarating. The city seemed different somehow, not changed, but reframed through the lens of what had transpired. I was no longer simply a husband, a stepfather, or a quiet man from the background. I had stepped into the role I had been entrusted with, met the challenges head-on, and emerged with clarity, authority, and purpose. I thought of my wife, her foresight, and the trust she had placed in me. Every decision I would make from this moment on would honor her legacy, protect what she had built, and shape the future she had envisioned. The battles, confrontations, and revelations had not just tested my capabilities, they had revealed them to the world, to my stepson, and most importantly, to myself. Later, in the quiet of my office, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The stepson had not yet fully embraced this reality, but he would come to understand that strength is measured not in entitlement, but in action. The lawyer had recognized my competence, the court had validated it, and the empire was now guided by my hands. But beyond the legal and strategic victories, there was an inner triumph. I had proven to myself that I was capable, resilient, and ready to define my own legacy. The city skyline stretched out before me, alive with possibilities. I knew the journey was far from over. Managing an empire, navigating relationships, and meeting future challenges would test me in ways I could not yet predict. But I faced it with confidence, clarity, and the quiet assurance of someone who had faced a storm, emerged stronger, and claimed their rightful place. And as I looked out over the city, I realized the true inheritance was not just the empire itself, but the discovery of who I was, the respect I had earned, and the legacy I was now empowered to shape. I had faced opposition, revealed my depth, confronted every challenge, and emerged not just victorious, but transformed. This was the culmination of strategy, courage, and quiet strength, the resolution of conflict and the foundation of a legacy that would endure.